bearing with me today. I've been having some issues with the University of Michigan Wi-Fi. So I'm on cellular, so I'm not entirely sure how the internet's going to be, but hopefully good. Just let me know if you can hear my audio, and we'll get started immediately. If is the audio okay? Can you see my screen? And then we'll just get started. All right, good. So today's video is going to be about how to get a perfect 6.0 on the AWA. And I hear a lot of people talk about getting a 4, getting a 4.5. And I can see that most of those people have not been on GMAT. Because if you have been on GMAT, there has been a guide that was published a long time back. The date that you see here, it's because it's updated. A long time back, 4 or 5 years back, by this legendary user whose username was Chinese Burned. Um, he created an AWA format that can pretty much guarantee a 5.5 or a 6.0 GPA AWA score. So without further ado, let me just go ahead and walk you guys through the format. So as you can see, I'm scrolling through the general format. So this is the format that we are going to follow. We're going to talk a little bit about the argument itself, and then we are going to attack the argument one by one, starting with the introduction, then the first paragraph where we pick out the first piece of the argument and destroy it, then the second piece of the argument, and then I'm going to ask some questions for the author of the argument, and then I'm going to summarize, right? So what I want to do here today is I want to use this same format, the intro, the first paragraph, the second paragraph, and the conclusion to answer a real AWA question, right? So let me know if you can see the screen okay. There's no zooming issue or any of those issues. Just make sure that all the screen stuff is perfect. It'll be a little bit hard for me to zoom in today, but I'm going to do what I can. All right, so now that we have zoomed in and we know what the argument is, we are going to tackle this question, which is an official AWA prompt taken from the GMAT. So this could very easily come on your GMAT exam. But I will say, though, most AWA passages are very, very similar. So I wouldn't worry about it too much if your own AWA is different. There's only so many different things that the GMAT will test during its AWA section in the GMAT. So it will be very, very similar. So I'm going to give you guys a few minutes just to read the whole thing and then figure out a strategy. And then I will follow the exact Chinese born guide to actually write an AWA just like I would during the GMAT. So let's read this along together. The following appeared in a memorandum from the business department of the Apogee Company. When the Apogee Company had all its operations in one location, it was more profitable than it is today. Therefore, the Apogee Company should close down its field offices and conduct all its operations from a single location. Such centralization would improve profitability by cutting costs and helping the company maintain better supervision of all employees. So that's the whole prompt, right? And then you will have a very common thing: discuss how well reasoned you find the argument, blah blah blah. That's basically the AWA question, right? So we're going to try to solve this exact question using the structure that I showed you here. So this is the structure. We are going to use the same structure. We might change a little bit of wording here and there, but we're going to use the same structure to get a really good response for this AWA question. Good? Does that sound good? So that's all we're going to do. So right now, my plan is, my first step is figure out an introduction. And what am I supposed to do during introduction? I'm supposed to attack it this way. The argument claims that. So basically, I want to restate some of the claims that the argument has made. And then I'm going to write, stated in this way, the argument manipulates facts, reveals examples of leap of faith, fails to mention several key factors, right? Again, you don't have to write in those exact same words. In fact, I would recommend coming up with your own words, but the structure should ideally remain the same. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I'm going to start my AWA response with something like this. Right? So this is what I want to do. Sorry, I'm a horrible speller when I actually write. So this is my restatement, right? So that's the argument claims that. That's that portion. Now I want to move towards, stated in this way, the argument manipulates facts, reveals examples of leap of faith, fails to mention several key factors, right? So I'm going to do just that. Stated in this way, the argument is inconclusive without data supporting its hypothesis. Tends to manipulate facts to present a distorted view of the reality, and also is a leap of faith reasoning without clear outcomes. In sum, the argument could be improved if it is supported with relevant data on which its core assumptions depend on, right? So that's going to be my general introduction. I'm not going into details of each specific element of the argument, but I'm just trying to say overall, this argument is awful, and I want to be able to show you why the specific argument is awful, right? So that's the intro. I want to move to the live chat a little bit. I want to ask you guys, what do you think of the intro so far? How do you think we can improve it? Go ahead, tell me. All right, so I'm getting some responses. We should write a bit about the suggestion in the argument, which is what my first sentence was about, which is like a basic summary of what the argument is to its core. And for the intro, I think that's enough. We don't really need to go into the specific nitty gritties of the argument. I'm going to go there. I'm going to go there in my first point, in my second point, and my third point, and then the conclusion as well, right? So that's my intro. So I'm going to move on to the first step of the argument, right? So let's see what Chinese born wants me to do. Um, the first paragraph should be first, the argument readily assumes that this statement is a stretch. For example, clearly, the argument could have been much clearer if it explicitly stated that. So things of that nature, right? So I want to copy this and I want to paste it here so that it's in my head when I'm writing it. So let's see, what's the first piece of the argument that we want to really zero in on? So I want to take this sentence. I think this sentence is really important for me to pick apart. So this will be the first part of my attack, right? And I'm going to use this logic to attack that first piece, right? So I'm going to go ahead and say, that first, the argument readily assumes that something that happened in the past will truly reflect in all forms in the future. Well, because this whole operations in one location was in the past and that has been more profitable, right? But that doesn't mean it will be very profitable today. And it also depends on how you really define profitability, right? So for example, think about it. Think about something like a car dealership. Let's say you have a car dealership in a specific location. You make a revenue of, let's say, $10 million, and maybe you make a profit of $1 million, which means you make a 10% profit, right? And then you realize that you have hit the ceiling in the location. Maybe you're not getting any new clients, so you move to a second location. Now you have two car dealerships. Now, instead of making a $10 million in revenue, let's say you're making $20 million in revenue, right? But let's say your total profit is not 2 million, but it's 1.8 million, for example. So your profitability overall dropped from 10% to 9%. But that's still okay because you're still making a profit and you're still making good money. So it doesn't really mean that moving was a bad idea. So I'm going to take that argument first. First, that it's an argument that assumes that because it was working in the past doesn't really mean that it'll work in the future, right? This statement can be incorrect because there could be several market indicators that led to that led to apogee company creating new locations as profitable ventures in the business. For example, it could be possible that the company had hit the ceiling in a particular geography, and the only way for it to continue expanding was through building new locations, right? Then I'm going to follow this one. Clearly, solely relying on the past is not a good indicator of how things will turn out in the future. The argument could have been much clearer if it explicitly stated the size, revenue, profits of the apogee company while making this claim, right? So that's sort of my first whole paragraph. So I'm going to remove this, and I think this is pretty good. I think it's coming together really nicely. Again, I'm going to go back to the chat. Let me know if you have any questions. I'm going to keep this argument here zoomed in, and if you have any specific question, I'm happy to answer. Somebody said it's a little bit blurry. You have to change the resolution in your computer. The YouTube will let you change it up to 720p. So I recommend doing that so that it's more clear and it's more readable. So that's my second paragraph. I'm here for questions. Otherwise, I'll move on to the third paragraph. All right, so I'm getting a question. If a company hit the ceiling in one geography and it opened a new store somewhere else, would it not increase the profits? Yeah, no, I mean, sure, if the new location makes more profits, it would increase more profits. However, there could be more reasons. The new location may not increase profits, right? So it may be a loss-making unit. But look, I mean, that's not the point, though. The point is profitability, not profits themselves. So if you look at the argument, the point that it's trying to make is actually a point on profitability. It was more profitable than it was today, right? And profitability can be profits, but more often, profitability is a lot more to do with percentages. So it's the amount of profit divided by the amount of revenue. So even though you're making more profits, you could be less profitable than what you're used to. But that's not always a great thing or a bad thing, because you could have had, for example, let's say you're a stockbroker, let's say you're a trader of some sort, and now you have $500 to play and you're making 20% profit, so you're making $100. However, tomorrow, if you have $1,000 and you're making, instead of 1,000, instead of $100, you're making, 150, maybe you don't have the same levels of profitability, but you're still profitable. So it still might make sense. Okay, more questions. There would also be cost associated, so you can't assume it'll always be profitable. No, you can't assume that it's always going to be profitable. But the argument assumes that it will never be profitable, because at one point, because we had only one unit, it was more profitable. That should necessarily translate to the fact that even if we have a lot more units, they will never be profitable. That's the argument that we are trying to attack. So what we are trying to prove here, that look, it could be profitable, it could create more profit, but also it could create some other opportunities down the line. So lots of different questions, right? So we want to attack the argument that it's not profitable. Okay, so we'll move on to the next paragraph. So in the next paragraph, this is what Chinese Bond wants me to attack. Second, the argument claims that this is again very weak, so I'm going to copy paste that in my doc, and then I'm going to try to see which part of the argument I want to really attack. So I want to see, so this one is a conclusion, so I don't want to attack this one because that's overall what we are trying to attack. But this part should close down its field offices and conduct all its operations from a single location. Such centralization would improve profitability by cutting costs and helping the company maintain better supervision, right? So this is the one that I want to attack. So let's just jump into it. So I'm going to start with second, the argument claims that centralizing the workforce by cutting down on regional and field offices would improve profitability. Right? So I'm going to make sure my spellings are all good. This is again a very weak and unsupported claim, as the argument does not really take into account the nuanced issues that concern building or expanding to new units. To illustrate, often new units have a lot of upfront fixed costs at the beginning, which can have an impact on overall profitability. But after some time, the revenues greatly offset the cost. So unless the argument has a clear picture of the time frame, of the time money impact on the company's profitability, it is unwise to deem the new offices unprofitable. Further, cutting off regional and field offices might also lead to harmful employee sentiment at the best and costly layoffs at the worst that company may never fully recover from. If the argument provided evidence that the new locations are never going to turn profitable, it would have been more clearer to convince its goals. Right? So as you can see, I'm not following this guide to the T, but I am following the structure of the guide, but using my own phrasings, right? So again, I'm going to take like a 2-minute break, think you guys what you say. No, there won't be a spell checker in the exam. Sorry about that. But again, I'm going to be a lot more careful. And even without the spell checker, I think you should be fine as long as you're careful and you are you're not rushing through the sentences that you're writing. All right, if you have any other questions, let me know. Otherwise, we'll move on to the third paragraph. All right, so now we'll move on to the next para. Let's see what Chinese Born has to say. Finally, pose some questions for the argument, right? So that's exactly what I'm going to do. So I'm going to paste this first. Let me just remove this stuff. Right. So I'm going to follow this format to make sure that that's my third paragraph, right? So I'm going to start with this. Finally, the argument should answer questions such as, I'm going to do a semicolon, why are the new locations not profitable? What are some of the financial projections for the new locations, right? For example, even though they may not be profitable today, but if they're projected to make a lot of money, then should we close them down? No, we should keep them. We should, in fact, finance them even more so that I get to those numbers earlier in the game, right? And also, what are some of the contributions of the field offices to the company's overall bottom line? I'm using bottom line because the company is using profitability as its main measure. Otherwise, top line should be fine as well. So then I'm going to write the same thing without convincing answers to these questions. One is left with the impression that the claim is more of a wishful thinking. Again, you don't have to use these words, right? You can use your own words. That's totally fine. For example, the claim is more of a leap of faith than a well reasoned inference drawn from logical reasoning, right? You should make up your own words. You don't have to really use the same words as the um, the the user Chinese burned wants you to do, right? So I'm going to delete this. That's great. So look at our argument now. It's shaping up to be really good. Finally, I have one more paragraph. That's the conclusion. So I'm going to go ahead and do that because the conclusion is super important. So let's go for that one. So in conclusion, I'm going to just go to a new page. In conclusion, the argument is flawed for the above mentioned reasons and is therefore unconvincing. So I'm going to keep this one because this doesn't really have to change. In conclusion, the argument is flawed for the above mentioned reasoning, and is therefore not convincing. Right? Not mentioned, it's mentioned. It would be considerably stronger if the author clearly mentioned the implications of the new locations on the company's finances and also investigated into what really dragged the profitability down compared to the previous years. So, in order to assess the merits of a decision, it is necessary to have full knowledge of the contributing factors. In this particular case, it is the company's overall bottom line growth and projections, both with or without the new locations, and also the contribution made by the regional and field offices. Without this information, the argument remains indefensible and open to debate. Right? So that's it. That's my wrap up. So let me remove this one. So our whole argument now looks like this. So let me zoom out a little bit. I hope that's okay. So if I zoom out, our argument looks like this. So let's see. How many word is that? Let me just take a word count. So we have written about 544 words. That's actually a fair bit. That's actually quite a lot. So I'm pretty happy with how this whole thing turned out. So that's how you do an AWA. Again, you have to go to this guide. This guide is all you need. In fact, it's one of our most popular, most important posts on GMAT Club. It has over 2,000 kudos, 2,000 bookmarks. This is incredible. And also, there is a nice little infographic that helps you do the same thing. It tells you what to do with the introduction. It tells you what to do with the first paragraph, the second paragraph, the third paragraph, and the conclusion. Also, check out the GMAT Club's latest newsletter. We have an opportunity where you can write your own AWA essay and get it rated by an expert. That should also tell you if you're going in the right direction or not. With that said, I'm going to be open to a few questions, but we're sort of running out of time. but that's how you do an AWA. By the way, remember that you only have 30 minutes in the real GMAT to get done with an AWA. In all honesty, I took the GMAT 3 times, and eh, whenever I took it, the AWA took me about, I don't know, 10 to 12 minutes to write and finish, and I would take the next 5 minutes to do spell check, to make sure all my sentences make sense, to make sure I'm not using bad verbs or bad words. So I give myself about 5 minutes, and then I finish the section for in about 20 minutes, which gives me some buffer to rest before the IR section, right? So that's it. That's for the session today. Let me know if you have any questions. Otherwise, I'll see you guys next week. All right. So somebody says, so do you mean in the future it will be more profitable? Well, yeah, that's one of the ways we can attack it. Just because it's not profitable right now doesn't mean it won't be profitable forever. Amazon was not profitable for like 15 years or something, and now it's $1 trillion company. So it could also be one of those things. Do you get a spell checker in the exam? Not really. Sorry about that. What was the reason the company opened new stores in the first place? Yeah, that's a great way to attack it. I didn't use it, but you definitely can. What was the specific goal in opening up these new regional centers? Was the goal to make profit? Was the goal to increase new revenue? Was the goal to get new tax breaks? Why not? You can totally attack the argument in that way as well. All right, so that was my session for today. I'll see you guys next week. Hopefully things will be better next week. Let's all pray. Thanks so much for joining. I'll see you guys soon.